Tim Burton and Batman. Sweet. Well, let me make sure my shit's good to go and then introduce you. But yeah, so I guess before I do that, I mean, have you seen this movie as a Batman fan? Is this how does this rank as your Batman movies? What do you say?
So you made a big mistake. One, having me on the show, and two, asking me a question like that because I could go on for a long time. But I'll say this that I think the line on this movie historically, certainly the way I felt about it before I rewatched it recently, was that it's a good Tim Burton movie, but a bad Batman movie. That it is Batman is at best sort of a tertiary character, really not the focus. Clearly, Tim Burton is not very interested in Batman, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe you might enjoy the vibe, the sort of Christmas feel, et cetera, et cetera. It's certainly more of a Burton movie than the original Batman is, but you don't get a lot of The Dark Knight if that's what you're coming here for. So historically, I would have ranked it really low, but on this recent rewatch, I think I came away with a different impression overall, and I would bump it way up.
Well, this that will make for an interesting conversation. I think there's some varying opinions as Nat
That's
has a
that's
big
all right.
sigh.
That's all right. I'm used to disagreeing with Nat. He's used to disagreeing with me. That's all right.
Well, first let me introduce you both, and then we'll talk about this movie because I have some. You made a very good point there about it being a very good Tim Burton movie, but maybe not a good Batman movie, and maybe that's a good way to look at this. Look at this. But anyway, thanks everyone for joining this week on Left of the Projector. You are going to look outside, and it's almost Christmas because this is a Christmas movie we're discussing, and that is Batman Returns, the 1992 Tim Burton film with Michael Keaton, Danny DeVito, Michelle Pfeiffer, Christopher Walken. Solid cast. And with me to discuss this movie, I have the Black Casebook, Walt, who has a podcast he should also tell you about. And then I have, returning to the show, I have Nat, who is the podcast Collective Action Comics. Thank you both for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
And so for anyone listening, you've probably heard Nat and I discuss Superman, but as that's kind of your favorite comic book character, but I've brought on Walt from the Black Case Book to talk about Batman because you talk about Batman quite a bit.
I sure do. Yeah, I guess from a sort of nominally left wing perspective and from a nominally sort of intellectual or academic perspective, I'm neither of those things. But it's fun to pretend for a podcast for an hour or two at a time. But yeah, the Black Case Book, we just take a different Batman story every 2 months, really, at this point. That's kind of the schedule we're working on. And just do a really deep dive into it. So, for instance, just off the top of my head, we did an episode on The Dark Knight earlier this year. I'm using the royal we here. I should say that real quick. But we did an episode on The Dark Knight earlier this year, which was really an opportunity to talk about the war on terror and to talk about the transition from the Bush administration and the culture around it into the Obama administration, which I think The Dark Knight is a kind of interesting hinge point towards. And so it's just that kind of thing. Nat maybe can explain what my show is about better than I can. I don't know.
Well, that was my first episode that I listened to that Nat told me about, so that was my
Oh,
introduction to it. So
I use that episode to proselytize for the Black Case Book.
good. Good.
It is
I appreciate it.
astounding. I actually just listened to it again 2 nights ago.
And
yeah,
I hope
that
that's like a weekly, even nightly ritual.
I
Not just
definitely
for you,
drunk
but for everyone
texted
who
my
listens to
parents
this.
while listening to it, being like, "You have to listen to this."
yeah, well, maybe
Good,
maybe in
good.
the future we will talk about the Dark Knight on this podcast. But if you are listening and you are interested in Batman, definitely check that out. And then people may be familiar with your podcast now, Collective Action Comics, and you just finished up your season, so you
Thank
can
God.
give everyone.
Thank
Oh yeah,
God. Yeah, yeah. For anybody listening who isn't familiar, I just finished up my second season on the my second season of my show, the first and thank God only one on Mark Miller and Brian Hitch's The Ultimates from the early 2000s. Their revamping of the Avengers, and I can safely say that I'm glad to have it behind me. I'm happy that I got out of it what I got out of it, and I never want to think about it again.
Well, for the night, you can think about Batman Returns, as we'll get into that movie. And my memory, just as quickly, and then maybe I'll get your kind of impressions on just the movie and general thoughts before we kind of dig into the plot and some of the themes in there. But for me, I remember specifically the McDonald's promo as a kid, the little clear glass mugs that they gave out at McDonald's, I guess. And
This
I
is
just
a great
remember,
kids movie, too. We should note that. It's wonderful for children.
and
As
that's actually a
McDonald's
great
quickly learned.
as a great point is that this movie led to a very large underselling of their merchandise, and McDonald's did not like it, which also in turn partially led to Tim Burton not being involved in the third movie in the same way as directing it. But I just remember it being this very dark movie, and I don't think at that time I really understood this movie more than just being kind of above my head is kind of how I always felt like it was. It wasn't a fun kids Batman movie. And I think looking at it now, it still isn't a fun kids Batman movie. It's a very dark universe. It's Batman is barely in the movie, as we'll probably talk about. And I just my just thing is that this is a Catwoman movie.
Hmm.
I love
And
Catwoman in this movie.
I was about
And
to say, or a,
Penguin.
or
Yes,
a
true,
penguin
true.
movie. I would say this is a penguin movie, and it's about a loathsome but still pitiable wretch that is guided by forces he truly believes he understands but does not. Yeah.
Maybe I was thinking I
I,
wish it was a Catwoman movie because I feel
Yeah.
like that was interesting. Her character, anyway.
well, fortunately, I mean, we had a Catwoman movie with Halle Berry. I think everyone loved it. And yeah, that said everything that needed to be said.
Yeah, I know you said, Walt, that you at the opening you said it was kind of like a Tim Burton movie, less a Batman movie. Does that mean that but you still would rank it as a high up there on the Batman film list? What I don't know. Did like your opinion change? Would you say?
Yeah, I think it absolutely did this time around. I'll preface this by saying that I am not a Tim Burton guy. Generally, I really bounce off his how to put this, his bullshit. I don't really vibe with it that well.
I feel you on that one.
Or Danny Elfman, or honestly, a lot of his collaborators just really don't work that well for me. And before I watched this, I also rewatched the '89 Batman, and it really does sort of pay dividends to watch these back to back, or at least like part of the first one back to back with Returns, because you can tell that this is a sort of this is the work of a liberated director. That actually Joker says that in the '89 Batman. He says, I've been dead before. It's very liberating. You'll find it therapeutic to a guy he's about to kill. And I do feel like that's sort of what this is. It's almost like a resurrection of Tim Burton's aesthetic career. And so anyway, I think it's just got wonderful like tonal and formal control. It's exactly the movie that he wanted to make, I think, free from John Peters's influence, the legendarily evil producer who hangs like a shadow over many DC things. But the Batman of it all, I'll say this, that the line on this movie, not a great Batman movie. He's very barely in it at all, and I think Kevin Smith sort of famously said that the only time he sounds like Batman is at the very end, where he tells Christopher Walken, "Shut up, you're going to jail." Basically, like that, a classic Batman line. But the longer I've spent really thinking about Batman stuff, the more open I am to sort of the versatility of the character, and that it doesn't have to be just one thing or really even involve any particular elements besides guy lost his family to crime, traumatized by it, learns how to fight crime, dressed like a bat. That's all you got to do. And anything beyond that is gravy, essentially. It's not my preferred incarnation of Batman, but at the same time, I think that he's got a real vision for him, which is this moody, Byronic, dark sort of hero who isn't really almost even in control of his actions. I love that when you first meet him in the movie, he's just sitting in hibernation, basically. It's just like in stasis, waiting for the bat signal to turn on, and he becomes alive again. And I think the movie does a really good job of threading that sort of almost animal drive in him along with Catwoman and Penguin. I think it does, again, just good tonal, formal, thematic control throughout that you really don't find in the others.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nat.
Oh well, I was gonna say, Evan, I have a favor to ask of you, because Walt and I are going to disagree on so many things about this, and because Walt is going to be correct, I would like you to mix me a little bit louder in in the final product so that I come across more confident in my wrongness. But I
Uh,
do I do have sort of a digression about, it's not about tone, and it's not really about like a through line. It's about sort of a sensibility to the movie that I didn't connect with, right? And not to move us too far out of the realm, because I promise this is applicable, but one of the biggest complaints about the Fallout series once Bethesda took over was that Bethesda knows how to make really cool set pieces that don't make any sense. Like when you leave the vault for the first time in Fallout 3, the first city you come to is Megaton, a city made from broken airplane parts that are cobbled together and welded together into this sort of impenetrable fortress around an unexploded atomic bomb. Literally right next door to it is a complete village of homes, including a school that nobody lives in. And there's no reason for that. And I get the same vibe from this movie, that it likes the spectacle more than it likes the sensibility. And to an extent, it succeeds in ways that I appreciate, like the iconic shot where the bat symbol goes into Wayne Manor, right? That doesn't make any sense and would give away his secret identity to anybody who's standing around him at the time. But because it is so stylistic, it works. Why does the Penguin have clown henchmen? Right? They kind of table set a little bit by showing him by explaining that he is head of the Red Triangle gang, which
He grew up in a
steals.
circus
Yeah, he grew up in the circus, right?
or carnival or whatever.
Well, they don't need that. They could have had animal themed bad guys or animal themed henchmen for the Penguin, right? It feels like there is sort of an underthought to a lot of this, and that's my biggest complaint.
well, that sounds a lot like kind of like what you said, Walt. I think is that for Burton, Batman is kind of like the secondary piece to this, whereas the style and the mood and the characters and the lighting and everything being very dark is just it's very Tim Burton esque. Like I do like a lot of his movies. A lot of them I don't. I kind of have a mixed feelings about some of them, but I don't know. I think it works for this version of it of Batman. I don't know. I don't say I love this movie. I don't know if I hate this movie. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm gonna be the moderate for this for our discussion. The hated dreaded moderate.
I
There's a
can't wait
third
for
way.
the third way. Jesus.
Yeah.
Um, I can't wait to come back to this movie in 10 years and finally appreciate it. But at the moment, I really just do not like it.
Well, Nat, may I submit a theory that I have about this, which really did come to mind while I was watching it the other day? I think there's a real underlying, and it's one of the things I really enjoy about the movie. There's a real misanthropic tone to this, where much as it is the case in Batman '89, and as is the case in Mars Attacks and a lot of other Burton movies, where regular people are rubes, they suck, they're easily misled, and in this case are hilariously misled, played like a harp from hell, as the Penguin says. And I do think there's something about that basic like amorality of it that is almost like the thing you just finished covering. It's very the Ultimates. It's very Mark Miller in the sense that like nobody's right. Some people are just less wrong than others, and there's not like a strong like deep moral compass to this. It's much more like, can these people who are all different varieties of outsider find like their way to live in this world? And this is a world where Tim Burton is the god of this universe, and the universe bends towards weirdos and outsiders, and either you fit into it or you don't. And again, there's no like real optimism about people in it. That's just not part of the deal, which makes it a hilarious Christmas movie, I feel like.
I know
That's
that's
a fair
one of the
point.
things about it being a Christmas movie, and you get the initial shot at Christmas, and then you have the fast forwarding 33 years later, when Penguin is reemerging from the depths. And I don't know, I think maybe it's worth talking about each of the characters a little bit, kind of. I know we can definitely talk about the plot through and some of the bits to it, but I think some of the
No,
characters.
we can't because there is no plot. Continue.
Okay.
Oh, pish posh is what I'll say.
We'll talk about the plot in quotation marks. Is that okay, Nat? Is that good for you? But I feel like the in maybe it's the way that this movie is kind of laid out is you have this. I don't know if it's a different Gotham. It's definitely less what I would call sort of like crime ridden, as you might see in some of the maybe newer incarnations, at least in my mind, of coming to clean up the city. I mean, clearly there is some of that piece to this, but God, where was I going with this? Oh, so you sort of have like the one of the best performances I feel like in this movie is Christopher Walken as Max Shrek. I feel like his bizarrely white hair and just his mannerisms just so is I love him in this movie. I don't know. I just like Christopher Walken,
I,
but they
I feel almost vulgar in this Yuletide context to submit my corruption plan to you. He is so fun in this movie. I get such a kick out of him.
yeah, very very much. But yeah, like you said, he's like very much the he's it's like an obvious villain. I mean, I guess a lot of times in movies like this, it's like a very obvious villain. But him laying out his plan so nakedly of what he's doing for the city, how he's essentially pretending to be a good person and giving out little bits of charity, very much like the average billionaire or millionaire would do. And his plan is to basically build a power plant that's going to suck energy away from the city and profit. And he's doing it for his son, all for his son, which I feel like is kind of a maybe it's a throwaway, but I don't know. I feel like Max Shrek is like also a fun piece to this movie that gives a little bit of brightness to the darkness, even though he's a dark, terrible person.
Let me
Yeah,
submit to you. I'm sorry. Okay, so let me submit to you. They don't do enough with Max Shrek. Max Shrek is a shining light in the movie, but every plot thread that they set up basically gets either shot down or ignored, right? Like the only time they really mention the fact that there's going to be a power plant that actually is a backwards power plant that just is a capacitor that takes everybody's power for evil. The only time that has any consequences is just so they can use it to justify his attempted murder of Selena Kyle. And then there is, well, I guess there's two times that it has.
That's not true though.
Well, he uses it to explain why he wants Penguin to be mayor, right? And then there's no payoff after that. What is the payoff?
Well, Penguin doesn't become mayor.
No, with the power plant. So
he can't get approval. That's the thing. That's why he feels vulgar in this Yuletide context. Is that he needs to get
how
the city
bureaucratic.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, he needs to get the city on his side, but certain people in the city, the mayor, Bruce Wayne, maybe you've heard of him, will not allow this, and so he tries to go around them to like recall the mayor or whatever by propping up this complete psycho, and it doesn't work out great. That's it's a tale as old as time.
So yeah, yes. I mean, I understand like textually what they were trying for, but it'd be really cool. I think it would be more effective if the power plant had come to fruition and the resulting power outage was perhaps, say, how Batman, or rather Bruce, figured out that Selena was Catwoman. Maybe bring back the answering machine from the beginning, right? Like, he finds out that only certain parts of the grid still have power, and he knows that Catwoman is somewhere, and that somewhere still happens to be powering Selena Kyle's answering machine. And then he figures out, well, how come that went through when it wouldn't go through to any other? She must be my nemesis, right? I mean, it's just hypothetical. I'm not here to Monday morning quarterback or anything like that. But I feel like it could have been more solid with his character, because I agree he was one of the best parts.
Yeah, I feel like he is. I mean, I know you pointed this out before, Nat, on your show, but the character of Lex Luthor changed dramatically after a certain major event in DC Comics in the '80s.
Mm-hmm.
To not get into it, but he gets refashioned as Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that becomes the explicit inspiration for him, and I don't think that has really carried through in any of the movie adaptations of him since then. But it definitely carries through in Max Schreck, who literally says at one point, "You're fired," in a very Trumpian way. His son, Chip, which is makes me laugh every time, Chip Schreck is Don Jr. I don't know how they knew at this point, but like it is eerie in the way that it like presages this horrible family that will become so much even more prominent than they were in the early
Mm-hmm.
'90s. And I don't know. I think that the to your broader point, Nat, I think that the this movie is not that interested. It's like a Batman '66 episode. It's a very Adam West, but like a completely different opinion of humanity and lack of color, etc. Um, Evan, were you gonna say something?
Well, I was. It's actually a good. This is like happens a little later in the movie, but it's interesting you mentioned Adam West because the scene a little bit into the movie, and maybe it's when I think maybe when Catwoman first emerges and Batman is fighting, the red circle,
Red Triangle.
red triangle.
Wrong
Got a
shape.
shape, wrong shape. The red triangle gang. The thing I noted immediately was this feels like a old school Adam West fight without the like pow and the little like zoink and the little images
It's
on the
this
screen.
close. Yeah.
It was very close, but
But
to
not
build
close
that
enough. That's my point.
to do if they had done that, like, gone that further level, I think that actually would have made the movie all for the better because you'd have this dark movie with these like little bits of light, and I don't know.
May
I
I
just made me think
recommend
of
the
the
Joel
Adam West
Schumacher
stuff.
Batman?
Yeah, right.
movies
Right.
to you?
Well,
They
like
go a
so,
little
yeah.
bit.
That speaks exactly to what I was just saying, Evan. Is that like there are moments in this movie that are so stylistic that I can forgive the fact that they don't make any sense, right? Like I like stylism. I mean, that's the point of watching a movie is to see images on the screen that appeal to you, right? And like, or in sequence. But anyway, like I love the bat signal. I love the throwaway bit where he reaches into the aquarium and then
Yeah.
pushes the thing and then goes into the Iron Maiden. And then, but the best part, the best punctuation on that is Alfred being like, "No, I'm going to use the other entrance."
I'll take the stairs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'll take the
Um,
stairs.
yeah. No, that's awesome. But to me, I feel like two points. One, to the stylization of it all. I really cannot recommend highly enough watching the first Batman movie in close proximity to this one, just a little bit of it, even because that I can't remember the guy's name, but he was Terry Gilliam's cinematographer, like his preferred DP. He did Brazil and a million other things with Terry Gilliam, which you would think would be a good fit with Tim Burton and like the sort of like we love Dutch angles, we love just doing crazy off the wall stuff, but there's a really uncomfortable, as famous as the aesthetic is in the '89 Batman movie. It's not a really it's a sort of noticeably uncomfortable blend of like Dick Tracy sort of noir esque stuff with a gothic feel. And Anton First, the production designer, obviously does it's almost like H.R. Giger stuff in the way that it's like you're like in the belly of this horrible gothic city. But the tones kind of clash. Like they don't feel really natural, and that movie feels really still and stilted at points that you can just tell Burton is not comfortable operating in this to use a film term, a mise en scène. Like it's not his world, and I feel like you're in the Burton world as soon as you see the big cat head on top of Shrek Tower in Batman Returns. I think we're living in a much more like tonally confident. It's also worth noting that he hired all his favorite people. Like he hired his cinematographer, his production designer, et cetera. It's Stan Winston and others to like implement his vision. And I think it's really, whether you like it or not, I think it is a much better encapsulation of that vision than you'll see in the other Batman movie. Now, that said, I do think this is a movie about people trying to realize their visions, trying to perform for others in a way that doesn't necessarily like plot point to plot point makes sense. But the thing the movie's concerned about is how do these people like realize the characters they want to be, the performances they're trying to achieve. Batman, obviously a performance, wounded child, doesn't know who he is as a human being, but experiences a sort of metaphorical death, going into an Iron Maiden, goes down a chute, becomes Batman. The Penguin should have died being dumped into icy water and then becomes the Penguin and briefly pretends to be a human being, but then noticeably says at the end, I am not a human being. I am the Penguin. And then Catwoman obviously is risen from the dead by cats, the power of cats. And yeah, she also embraces her performance, even talks to a mirror image of herself who's being mugged early on and says, you make it so easy, don't you? Waiting for a Batman to save you. And she's talking to herself, as she does again in the mirror later on in the movie. It's how viable and how passionate can these performances be? How persuasive can they be to an audience and to the person doing the performance? I think that's what the movie is all about. And I think Burton's style really carries that through across the board. That's my thought on the movie.
Yeah, and I wonder if maybe part of, I don't know if this plays into what you're thinking about it, and that is it possible that each of those characters sort of individual identities, because I really like the Catwoman performance by Michelle Pfeiffer. I mean, I think she's
Incredible.
excellent in this movie. I mean, just really great. I definitely want to talk about it more, but is it possible that the characters don't maybe work together with one another? I feel I didn't feel very much like the Penguin and Catwoman sort of scenes were very, I didn't really love them. I mean, I felt like there was some humor they were going for and some sort of awkward, Penguin trying to hit on
Very
Catwoman.
kid friendly.
Yeah, right, exactly.
She
Kid-friendly.
eating his bird.
Yeah,
I'd forgotten about
that
that
is one
scene.
thing that does not work for me. I will say, but I think honestly to your point, Evan, I think part of the deal is that Selena is very uncomfortable being a full on villain. Like she is not trying to be King Herod and slaughter the firstborn of Gotham like Penguin ultimately is. That's not really a role as much as she's trying to be bad. Life's a bitch and so am I. She's trying to be this, but she isn't really. She is not convinced of her own performance. And so I think there's a necessary tension when she and Penguin are up against each other because he is a complete fucking monster, like with just the barest hint of sympathy to him. But yeah, he's no good.
Well, I think Catwoman actually probably has the most reason for being angry. I mean, she's treated horribly by all the men at her company.
Yeah.
Especially by Shrek, who literally kills her or attempts to kill her. She's hit on by people. She has a date to go on some kind of trip, and then the guy backs out at the last minute. She's very unsure of herself, and I think for the reason being that these men are so terrible to her that it just destroyed her entire self-esteem. And being inside of this Catwoman suit actually gives her a confidence that she never had before, which I think is what makes her character interesting to me. And just also every scene that she's in as Catwoman is just very memorable and very, just. And as a side note, they had 60 Catwoman suits that they made for this movie, apparently.
That is a tricky line that we have to walk, though, because we have to look at it from a perspective that isn't our own. When I was watching this with my girlfriend, she was very annoyed that Catwoman came into her own by fully sexualizing herself. And there is something to be considered there, right? I mean, it's not exactly male gazy, but it's still a leather suit. It's still a leather. I mean, she somehow made a whole suit out of one raincoat, but still, that's actually not something I'm particularly quibbly about.
Yeah.
I still think that's pretty fun. And there is is it really self-actualization if the character is written by men for men?
Yeah, I don't have I'm not the guy to answer that question. I don't
Right.
think, but
We'll
I
get
will
Courtney
say
on the
this.
pod.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great idea. I will say this that part of the structural issues with this movie that you guys have pointed out is that it's a hodgepodge of several different scripts. That originally Sam Hamm, the guy who did the first Batman movie, was supposed to do all this, and some of those elements, including it being set at Christmas time, do remain. And then the guy who wrote Heathers, Daniel Waters, did the bulk of the script, including basically every good like witty one-liner. That it's just like rapid. I mean, you just so many good lines in this movie. And then finally, a third person got brought on to like bring it up to what Burton wanted, and that's when like the murdering all the firstborn children gets brought in. But the Heather's guy, Daniel Waters, specifically mentioned that the original draft with Sam Hamm was much more explicitly like fetishizing Selena,
Really?
and that it was much more male gazy and much more about like people's view of her rather than her own view of herself. And I think, again, just from my perspective, I think the fact that it is kind of an awkward fit and she isn't totally self-actualized doing this, I think is part of the point. That's not necessarily who she is, and she's really wrestling. I think Bruce says this at one point: split down the middle.
Yeah.
They both are, and neither of them are fully comfortable in either role. I think they have not fully individuated, to use a Jungian term,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and to become the people they need to be.
Well, she does seem to want to be. She wants to have this relationship with Bruce Wayne in some sense, or she's struggling with it. And it's all of those scenes also. I feel like those are actually some of the times you see Batman the most, or I guess as Bruce Wayne, in his scenes where he's, kind of pursuing Selena. And it's not actually. I don't find it overly sexualized in those portions. It's as Catwoman, and when she's struggling, as you're saying, Walt, to sort of find herself, she doesn't really know where she's going. But I mean, I guess we've kind of talked about Penguin and Selena and Shrek. So I guess maybe we should talk about the guy Batman. I think he's in this movie. I think it's about him.
It's like
Yeah.
15 minutes of it.
20 minutes. But I mean, we briefly talked about kind of him being this, kind of his mood of this. But I think your point of watching the original Batman '89 kind of into this, I hadn't seen that. I didn't watch it. I should have done that. That would have been a good move. But I hadn't seen it in a little while. What do you think about how they kind of create Batman in a movie that's really like not as much a Batman movie as is kind of a movie about a hodgepodge?
Yeah, I think they're much more interested in creating Gotham and what like a Gotham City of the soul, essentially, like something that, for instance, I actually mentioned this in the Dark Knight episode that I did for my show, that Christopher Nolan sort of studiously avoids. Like he does not create a separate sort of subjective reality in a city. It's just Chicago or Pittsburgh or New York. I think they're really concerned with creating like an environment in which these freaks can kind of find themselves or whatever. And so I think Batman is part of that. I think he's set up, as one player in an ensemble. It's not really about him, as we've talked about. But he embodies the city best. Like he's a gargoyle, essentially. And that's more true in the first movie than it is in Returns. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's a piece of production design for a lot of it. And then as the movie kind of goes along, especially in the Bruce Wayne scenes, I think you see his intelligence more. I mean, it's obviously goofy, cartoony, like he puts in a CD and does a little, like we get DJ Bruce, he does a little remix, and jams the frequency or whatever. There's not a lot of like detective work going on, but it's worth noting that most Batman movies have no interiority for the character. I mean, like you're not really in his perspective in a lot of them. That's certainly true of the first Batman movie. It's really the best examples would be the new The Batman that came out in 2022, I guess. Is that right? 2021?
20, yeah, around there.
22, I think. March 22. That's right, because I did it for the show. Anyway, but yeah, that's all about like who is this guy? Like why does he do what he does? Like what's his character arc? How does he change from the beginning of the movie to the end? Basically, no other Batman movies do that. The arc is, can he get better at fighting the Joker? And you're not really brought inside of him. So absent him being like the true protagonist of the movie, what can he give you? He can give you mood and atmosphere, and he can reinforce the themes that we really see play out in Penguin and Catwoman. That's my thought on it. Like he's not my ideal Batman. Don't love it when he's a complete fucking psycho murdering people. But in the sort of gothic atmosphere, the vision that Burton's putting out there, I think he totally works, personally.
I think Evan had the most devastating critique of of the Batman ethos on Instagram the other day when he said that those clown henchmen hacked the Batmobile like a Tesla.
It's very true. It's very true. I mean, we haven't seen what the Cybertruck can do, so I think let's put judgment.
We know that it is
But-
bulletproof.
We do, and arrow proof. I I can't remember who shot the arrow, but it blew right up. So I'm pretty impressed. When you're driving that thing through Sherwood Forest,
Was it
you
Peter
are
Thiel?
in good hands.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Was it Peter Thiel who shot the arrow? I don't know. Maybe I just
Is that true?
I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe
Peter
that's
Thiel shoot an
no.
I don't think it
maybe that's
was,
not
but
true.
you've summoned something dark into this world by saying that.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to really meditate on that.
But I guess this kind of brings us to like another question about the movie. I'm sorry, Walt, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. Go ahead.
Well, so we've got this weird libertarian ethos, but I say that knowing full well that I don't think this movie was meant in any way to be political. And I know that being apolitical is its own type of politics. I don't think this was trying to say anything. This was just trying to put a goofy Batman on the screen. But what we ended up with was two industrialists pitted against each other. Max Schreck versus Bruce Wayne. And however shallow you want to look at that, I just think that's a very funny, almost coincidence, to be honest. Like, I don't think it
Yeah.
meant to say anything, and I don't think there's a whole lot to be read into it, but it is there.
I do. I think it does mean to say, again, like assuming that the real author of this vision outside of Tim Burton is Daniel Waters, who did the bulk of the script. And if you've seen Heather's, like you kind of get the vibe here, which is that just railing against sort of like Reagan era hypocrisy of like unfettered capitalism, what we would now call a neoliberal late capitalism. I don't think they had that sort of terminology at that point. But just a sense of like like I think that the movie actually does take some like it is a little indignant at the fact that Shrek can so easily go out there and ad lib a speech about how I'm just some poor schmo, like got lucky. That's all. And he's obviously full of shit. And the movie's like, look at this guy who's so full of shit. And I think the contrast, and also like, look at this guy who's so full of shit. And I think there's a great line in there at one point where he says, I have enough people just on my own payroll at Shrek Industries or whatever that I can do a recall just with my employees. I have that amount of power over these people. Like the veneer of democracy or whatever. Oh, that's another thing. Actually, there's a great line that Shrek has later on where he says, I am the light of the city and I am its mean, twisted soul. Does it matter who's mayor? And I think that, like, the deep down, I think the movie wants to say, yes, it should. It should matter who's mayor. It should matter. Like, we should all have a voice in this. I think Selena, as sort of this anarchic presence, really drives that home. And I think the movie is wise not to show at all, like, the source of Bruce Wayne's money. As far as we know, he just inherited a castle. Like we don't see anything from Wayne Industries. He's just a prominent citizen. And it's the same deal in Batman the Animated Series, which I honestly kind of like, where it's not like, oh, he's the richest man alive. He's just a rich guy from a prominent family who happens to be a vigilante, like Moonlights is something completely different. So I don't know. I think that's where the movie's sort of like real thrust politically, as much as it exists, lies.
And I think I found a good sort of bit of humor, or even if this wasn't intentional, as you mentioned, while it has sort of how Shrek is portraying himself as this very neoliberal, 80s kind of like American dream, like, oh yeah, I just somehow made it to become a millionaire on my own. But sort of the way that Penguin rises too, I feel like back into prominence. He first comes out, to cause violence. He comes out as the duck in the first scene, the first time he comes out, and then Shrek almost is bringing Penguin from nothing to something, but he also finds out later they did come from, from money. So it's almost comical that he is going from a wealthy person who's cast away and he would be able to gain prominence again, not by luck or chance, but simply because of his past and the fact that another rich person is bringing him out. So I don't think that Tim Burton meant any political things from this movie. I feel like a lot of his movies somewhat feel a little bit apolitical, and maybe he does that on purpose. But this movie definitely is not. I didn't see much political of Gotham other than the same thing you said, Walt, of just kind of being the post-Reagan neoliberal kind of hellscape of, you don't really see you don't see any people in this movie who are working class except at the very end. Selena Kyle, and then you also see a scene later where Penguin is giving his speech. Penguin is giving a speech, and Batman scrambles the voice to manipulate what he's saying, and the people in the front of the rally are like starting to boo and hiss and yell with their signs that are there for the the Penguin rally. So I don't know. It doesn't. You get like the very wealthy, you get the villains, and you have like a little glimpse of the working class. You don't really have any. I don't know.
I do appreciate that our one like working class star of the movie destroyed her boss's department store by turning on all the ovens and putting spray paint in the microwave.
I appreciate that the security guards were not willing to die to defend the property.
They specifically mentioned how much they take home. They're like, I only take home was like $300. Yeah, I'm not. You can just go ahead.
I also love her line, "You're overpaid."
Yeah. Did you know that her? I didn't know this. When she whipped the heads off of those mannequins, that was in one take.
Yep.
She really did it. Yeah,
that's awesome.
I feel like we've touched on the characters, but we really need to mention the performances in this movie, especially Michelle Pfeiffer and Danny DeVito and Christopher Walken, are unbelievable. They were so great. Like I really appreciate Zoe Kravitz's take on the character in the Batman, but Michelle Pfeiffer, I mean, like that is Mount Olympus of Catwoman acting. I mean, it's such a distinct take on the character. It's maybe not one that universally fits in a lot of contexts, but man, does she bring it home. She is so good in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And apparently she was getting into her latex suit was very difficult. Mm-hmm. And so they only would film sort of her scenes like in very short bursts. Mm-hmm. Partly probably maybe why she wasn't in the movie more. I don't know if that played a role in it, but
like as Catwoman,
and she had to
she couldn't breathe. As far as I'm aware, she couldn't breathe and like instantly overheated, which was the same deal with the Batman suit. Famous any rubber suit, like you're in real bad shape.
But as you said, Danny DeVito is also just absolutely flawless in this movie. His like speech and just the things dripping from his mouth, everything about him just makes me uncomfortable, but also thinking, damn, this is some good shit.
Wasn't his performance critically panned though?
It was.
Was it?
I think so. I thought he won a Razzie or something. I loved it. Don't get me wrong.
Or the Razzies are like after the revolution, the everyone involved with the Razzies will be re-educated. Like a struggle session needs to happen with the Razzies. But one man's opinion. That's all I'll say. But
one dictator's opinion.
Yeah, well, who knows? 5-year plans, etc. But no, DeVito is incredible in this movie. He really, to me, is the one who carries like the very specific narrow thread of tone in this, which is like, yeah, it's really dark, but it's also really silly and really funny, like genuinely very funny and very witty. Like he has a million different great lines, and he makes a feast of this movie. And I'll tell you one thing, really paying close attention to his performance and Pfeiffer's performance. To me, they are the antecedents of Heath Ledger's Joker, much more than Jack Nicholson's Joker is. There's a certain like guttural, weird, fanciful quality to both of them that I think like clearly was the inspiration that Ledger was drawing on more than anything else. For what it's worth. I know Ledger is, for many reasons been like canonized. That performance has been canonized. I think it's really great. But there's a clear like patrimony or lineage that it's drawing from
Yeah,
in
I can
these
certainly
two.
see that. I can certainly see that. There's a lot more of the, um, not to use a weird term, I suppose, mindless savage from Penguin that goes into uh, Heath Ledger's Joker than there is goofy clown from
Hmm.
Jack Nicholson's Joker. Yeah.
Yeah, which I say I love Jack Nicholson's performances by and large. I really don't love his Joker that much. Like he goes for it, but like I'm saying, like that's a movie where the all the different tones, all the different colors on the palette don't add up to one coherent picture. And Batman Returns, they absolutely do. That's my take on it.
As a Jack Nicholson fan, I also remember just thinking he was kind of didn't make any sense in that movie. Like it wasn't the Joker that it wasn't the Joker that they needed, or for that movie.
Yeah,
Uh,
but the Joker they deserve.
the
Yeah.
Joker they deserved, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very strange performance in a lot of ways because like I just don't think he kind of got the humor of him at all. Like he's certainly very scary and very grotesque, but yeah, he's an odd fit. He's an odd fit, and it. I really kind of studied him specifically really closely in the context of this, this episode that we're doing for Batman Returns because like he's the prototype. Because again, like Batman is not really about Batman. It's just not the '89 Batman. I mean, it's about Joker. It's a Joker movie, much as The Dark Knight is, and everything for Batman is filled out sort of in negative. And so, like, what do we learn from the Joker? We learn that he is a performance artist. There's a wonderful artist that I follow on Twitter, Devlin. I wish I knew his handle off the top of my head. Devlin Combs, maybe. Excellent artist. He's at the Kubert School right now. We're pulling for you, Devlin. But he made a great point, which was that there's an interpretation of the Joker that he isn't like some anarchist or terrorist or whatever that we get with Heath Ledger. Instead, he's just a basic crook, but who always had a showman in him. And by getting dumped in that vat, the showmanship finally comes out, and the inhibitions from being an artist come out. And I think you see that sort of in fits and starts in Nicholson's performance in Batman. And in Batman Returns, you see all these people really embrace their art in a way that I think is very charismatic. That's the word I would put to it. They're all very charismatic.
Well, I mean, Penguin's sort of artistic, his basket of different umbrellas and his very showman. He is a very showman in this movie, flying
Mm-hmm.
away when Catwoman and Batman are on the roof and he just kind of zips away in his umbrella and he comes in
There's
on
a
the
patent
duck.
speech to penguins.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like he's always performing for somebody. He's performing for Max Schreck. He's performing for Catwoman. He's performing for the people of Gotham. He's performing for the Red Triangle Gang. He's performing for Penguins, and for Batman. For all of them, they're all doing it, and that thread I think is really, really strong in this movie, and it has to have it. To y'all's points, like it doesn't cohere plot wise super great. Like it has to operate on a different frequency, and I think it nails it personally.
I think that is. I think that you and I agree fundamentally on that, except that you're. I think you simply just enjoyed the imagery and the stylizing more.
Mhm.
And for some reason, that just didn't connect with me. So I was less forgiving of the downfalls from the fact that there were three different writers,
Yeah.
right? And that might be coming from the fact that you are much more well versed in movie making and movie semiotics and stuff like that than I am. I'm not much of a movie guy, right? So coming into this as somebody who doesn't speak the language of movies as well as you do, I really didn't connect with it like you are.
And obviously, I mean, it's just like that's totally a matter of taste. In this case, like normally, I mean, Burton generally and his Batman movies have not been my taste. I've not really thought that fondly of them, even though they're the reason I'm in into Batman. You know, as a like my peer, the Penguin, a 33-year-old man, and he looks great for 33. He's looking
I was about to
pretty
say.
pretty fresh.
Better than all of us.
Preserved. Yeah, well, what can I say? But you know, normally that aesthetic does not work for me. But in this case, it probably is, to me, the best Tim Burton movie. I mean, it's like that, Ed Wood, I would say, are the contenders for me personally.
Edward Scissorhand, perhaps? No.
Edward Scissorhands, which I have not seen in a long time, so I have to recuse myself from that
That's fair.
conversation. But again, in this case, it really works for me. I don't know. It's a beautiful movie.
But I think your opinion on this, Nat, is fairly similar to many of the people, both critics, and I think the reception of this movie was, it just didn't really work. I mean, when you looking at Wikipedia, look at some of the, you know, the reviews. I mean, it's very mixed. Many people thought that Michelle Pfeiffer, again, like we've said numerous times, was excellent in this movie. I think that people thought that the beginnings of the movie were good, and then sort of the ending was kind of maybe a little bit too dark, you know, strapping bombs to penguins and wanting to kill babies. I mean,
it's a mess. I will say that. The third act of this movie is a mess.
That's where I think this movie
It also
kinda goes
isn't
off the
very
rails.
nice in our current political climate. Considering
I mean,
everything's-
we're all very sensitive to the penguin issue. I know what you mean. Yeah.
I mean, killing babies with rockets, but
Oh, well, Jesus.
I'm sorry. It's what I
You
thought
take
of
it
when
as
I was
not
watching
where
the
you're
movie.
going with that one.
How dare I?
I'm sorry,
I'm just kidding.
but
It's okay. It's okay.
but yeah, no. I know it's had a bit of a renaissance, critically speaking, in terms of its reception. And like I said, I can't wait to revisit it in 10 years and truly enjoy myself. Have a thoroughly nice evening while watching Batman Returns.
Will you say that about Batman Forever, though?
Okay, I like Batman Forever. But see, Batman Forever
don't.
sits in a place of it sits in a good memory hole of mine. So, and I'm not gonna rustle that.
Fair
I'm
enough.
not gonna uncover whatever grubs might be under that rock.
We don't
Evan, you
have to
mentioned at
dive
the
into that
beginning.
one. But I love Jim
you-
Carrey, so especially at that time of my life.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was a big Jim Carrey head at that point for sure. This is before the number 23, before you know his career took a turn. But you mentioned early on, Evan, the McDonald's glasses.
Was that from Forever?
It might be from both, but it's absolutely from Forever because
Okay,
I
I think
have
that's
a
right.
Val Kilmer sculpted glass mug from Batman Forever from McDonald's from when I was a kid, sitting on my desk at my office at work.
You're right. It was from Batman Forever. I think they did have McDonald's toys for this movie, Batman Returns, but
They absolutely
didn't
did.
sell
They did,
well.
and it was a big part of the problem. Yeah, like with the reception of it, I should say.
I think also just like the logo of the yellow kind of crest for Batman. Also, I feel like maybe people just didn't like. I don't know.
I love that one.
I do too. I
love
think it's
that
cool
logo.
looking, but it didn't like the shirts that had that logo on it just did not sell. They couldn't.
Interesting.
Maybe it was
'Cause
because
it's
the
not-
movie wasn't good, and so people didn't want to sport the logo of a loser. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, like, something that people who do not follow comics and certainly don't follow Batman comics don't realize is that Batman was like a successful comic book, but not like it was a leading title at DC, but it really kind of lagged behind Superman, notably, for a long time. And people will point to like The Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller comic, or Year One, also a Frank Miller comic, as like these big turning points, and they are in a lot of ways for the character. But sales-wise, it did not become the juggernaut that it is until Tim Burton's Batman. That completely changed the game for all of it. I mean, Batmania was a real thing, and in a lot of ways, I mean, Christopher Nolan sort of revived it. You know, it remains so today, and I think it's easy to forget that without the like requisite context or whatever. Is everyone else getting an ad?
Yeah,
right?
no,
I
I
had that
thought it
penguin and that Catwoman.
So the-
oh,
so,
and
so
that
for-
Batmobile.
For listeners, maybe this will be the logo, or I'll throw out a picture. You can Google it yourself.
Make that
but,
the episode art.
but these are
That's a
the
good one. That's such a-
McDonald's toys, which are just they're kind of cool. I like the penguin.
I
one
had
there.
all of them except the one with Batman's head on it. I had all of them. I probably
I
still
think I
do.
had Catwoman. I think I had that Catwoman. Also, this is I'll say, a somewhat misleading picture of the movie that
Yeah,
they're
it really
promoting.
is.
Um, I mean, this is I've made this joke before, but this is the first appearance of the word poontang in a Batman movie before it became Ra's al Ghul's catchphrase in Batman Begins. That was uh, that just the pussy I'm looking
I
for,
was
I believe
just gonna
Danny,
say
Danny
that
DeVito
line
says.
is.
Um, uh, Also, I'm pretty sure this is the only mention of Spiro Agnew in a Batman movie. It's so this script is wild.
Yeah.
Like whoever is responsible for what it is out of control, and the fact that they allowed this to happen is a miracle. I
I mean,
think.
I think just being Tim Burton and the fact that they probably sunk so much already into, no, think of the whole universe of toys and merchandise and everything. They just you had to go with it, and
He refused to return unless he had like complete creative control.
right.
And that's a big part of the story of this movie is that he's like, well, what the, like I already said everything I needed to say in the first one, and that wasn't that much. Like I could never really connect with this character, and so if I'm coming back, I gotta like find a. I don't like sequels. Period. I got to find a whole different way to explore this material, and they found some different ways to to approach it. You gotta hand it to them. Um, I don't know. Before we get off like the merchandise element of it, I will say that so much of Batman's success is just it's a cool design. He's just a cool looking character, and it is really start the contrast in just the general look and the movement that you see between Batman '89 and Batman Returns. The Batman Returns costume is awesome. It's really cool, and Keaton is less of a just like a static gargoyle, with it. It's a little bit more fluid. I don't know. I love this suit. It's a terrific one.
Bet Michael Keaton got. I saw this online. He got paid $11 million for this movie, which was a pretty big chunk of the budget. And apparently, part of his reason for being willing to do the role, one was that it had to be a standalone movie. He didn't want to sign on for a third movie, and he also apparently wanted to purchase some large real estate deal, and he needed the money, and so he was willing to do this movie because he needed some cash. Because this is fairly early in his career. He's I mean I say he's a star, but I won't say maybe he's the star you think of him now.
He was a bright star briefly.
Yeah.
He was a star because of this. I mean, or because of Batman '89, I should say. I mean, like Beetlejuice obviously was a successful movie. Um, what Mr. Mom had done well too, but
I forgot he was in that.
he was, and people were much like with Heath Ledger. People were very, very Batman fans were very skeptical of this tiny man, a comedian by and large, doing this character. And on paper, it does not fit. But I've always been a fan of Keaton's performance, and especially as Bruce Wayne, in the non like cowled moments. But I think his performance in the suit is way better in this movie than it is in the last one. Like he had figured certain things out, especially like using his eyes, and part of that's just the lighting as well. Again, great cinematography in this movie. I don't know. I think they just like they execute a lot better in like the fundamentals of the character in this movie, even if he is not featured as much as you would expect from a Batman movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think him as Bruce Wayne, like he is like that slick kind of Bruce Wayne more than I think maybe some of the newer iterations. He very much
Certainly
embodies.
Robert Pattinson.
Yeah, definitely that. But he just has this like this vibe to him where you could just see him being this kind of rich, guy in a boardroom, getting his helping Shrek with his power plant if he gets a little chunk on the side for Wayne Enterprises or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I was just thinking of this. One of the other Michael Keaton movies that I remember was really pushed up. I think it was a couple of years after this. Was Multiplicity? Do you remember that one?
Multiplicity.
No.
I think that and
Harold
Jack
Ramis,
Frost. I think spelled
Oh,
doom
Jesus,
for his
Jack
career
Frost.
for a good like 15 years. And I think he also was like raising his kids,
Oh,
doing
God,
stuff
what
like
a
that.
fool.
But yeah, I mean, like it wasn't until like Birdman basically that
Yeah.
which a movie that I really do not like, but
I don't either, actually.
Give me Batman Returns any day, or Batman Forever, or Batman and Robin, any of those over Birdman any day. But I'm glad to see Michael Keaton back. It's a welcome return, I will say.
Especially in the Flash.
Well, he was supposed to be, wasn't he supposed to be in
Let's
Batgirl
get
too? And
nuts.
they canceled that, right?
He was in it. They made a movie. It was in the can, and they were like, you know what? This will be too damaging to the sterling reputation of the DC or DC cinematic universe. We cannot allow this to be released. And it's like, did you see The Flash? Did you see what you put out immediately after this? Just a
I heard
disastrous movie.
a rumor about the Batgirl movie, and I couldn't find the link. Someone had sent this to me a few months ago. That part of why they didn't release Batgirl was there was some aspect of it that was too revolutionary, but no one exactly knows what that it is because we don't really know the full what happens. I guess because we don't have a movie or a script, so who knows? if
Brendan
that's actually
Fraser as
true.
Firefly is just constantly quoting Mao. He's handing out War Red books everywhere.
This is how I combat liberalism.
Exactly.
He gives away his fortune.
I find that, I find that to be a somewhat convenient explanation.
Of course, I'm sure.
But
there's some.
maybe that's true. Maybe it is. Honestly, I don't know.
I like to think of it maybe as somebody who was involved in making it, who had a much higher opinion of their own contributions to it than they deserved. And they said, oh, I was too dangerous in it. My work would have revolutionized movies. We had to shelve it.
They were not ready for a Batgirl.
Who plays the villain in the Batgirl movie?
It was Brendan Fraser.
That's
Firefly, yeah.
Reigning Best Actor winner, Brendan Fraser, was going to play the pyromaniac villain Garfield Lynn's Firefly, who is not a very interesting bad guy. I gotta say, I don't know what they were going to do with that.
I was trying to find the quote he says. He was the one who came out in some interview where he said something about it, the bad guy being too you would side too much with the bad guy.
Like too sympathetic.
Yes.
In
That's
his, like,
what it is. So
revolutionary
revolutionary wasn't the
ideals.
word, but you'd essentially be rooting for him in the movie. And
He's like burning down the Dollar General because he's the only one that they scheduled for that day there. Because they lean staff too hard.
yeah, that's disappointing because it
I'd
made
watch
the
that
whole
movie.
thing. But yeah, so someone will eventually leak that movie, and we will all be able to enjoy it, perhaps.
It's just such an interesting, like, because if I had to guess, this like revolutionary potential aside, this is probably a completely forgettable, nothing movie. Maybe it rises to the level of like a Birds of Prey, which was, in my opinion, pretty fun, but like fairly disposable. Like outside of a really great Margot Robbie performance, as she pretty much universally does. And so like, who would have thought about this a second time after walking out of the theater, right? But like now that it's been sequestered in the vault or whatever, all copies burned, like you have to wonder, like it takes on a like almost a legend of its own that it never would have if they just fucking dumped it in January
Streisand
or whatever.
effect.
Yeah.
So this is I found the quote from Fraser. He says, it was a story about a guy who had been in the service and his benefits had been cut and he was angry at the system. And what else was he going to do but burn it to the ground? And that's all you need to know. Super villain right there. You've got some sympathy for him. He has humanity. On top of that, he has a screw loose because he's the bad guy. But like, is he really the bad guy?
That is such a Marvel approach to a villain. Like literally Michael Keaton as the Vulture in the first Spider-Man movie, like gets fucked out of his contract or whatever by Tony Stark and damage control. He's a blue collar guy. You see his house eventually, and you're like, oh, this guy's just a shitty small business tyrant, like they all are. But
bourgeoisie.
yeah, absolutely, yes. Just another Long Island asshole. But he, there's some like sympathetic feeling there, at least a little bit. And he doesn't really want it. Like, he's a bad guy, yes, but in the sense that like many Spider-Man villains are, where he like will rob a bank or whatever, but he's not trying to kill all the firstborn children, for instance.
Right. With
and
penguins.
they have to undercut that sympathetic nature at some point be like, by the way, this guy's actually crazy, or he's actually evil, or whatever. Like Killmonger, like Magneto, like a million other. Marvel, I think, really specializes in this, whereas DC tends to lean towards just completely evil, supervillains.
Well, it's sort of like when I was listening to that quote where he said this guy was in the service and he got his benefits cut. You know, in one of my episodes, I talk about MDMA research for the troops. And that was because the guy who wanted this MDMA research, who started off fairly left-wing politically, and then just got too focused on MDMA and its benefits, decided that the
We've all been
most
there.
yeah, right. Decided the most sympathetic group to cynically use was the troops, right? And that's, I think, sort of playing on the same, tugging at the same heartstrings of propagandized Americans. So I don't know how revolutionary that would have been if we're supposed to sympathize with somebody who's in our Imperial Armed Forces.
Well, I mean, from Brendan Fraser's perspective is also a different perspective than I
Well,
feel
of
like.
course, of course.
So there, yeah. But that's a pretty valid point. That
I mean, I
you
don't think that Brendan Fraser is a Maoist third worldist,
no.
We don't know.
but I
We
haven't
don't
talked
know.
to the
He
guy.
disappeared for a while. Maybe that's what he was doing in that
Yeah.
10-year gap, right after the mummy part. Whatever.
He was committing to Juche thought.
Yeah,
That's
right.
what was happening. He's becoming
He came
really
back and-
into the Kim family.
Yeah, he befriended Dennis Rodman, and they.
Right. Gets a paintbrush tattooed on his forearm.
But yeah, so I'm going to ask you this question, Nat. Have you been persuaded in any way? I don't know how to phrase this. Has your opinion been slightly lightened or changed?
Can I butt in real quick?
please.
You guys,
No, you
guys
may not,
hopped
Walt.
on this a little bit before I did, and y'all were discussing and seemed to be very roundly negative. Was the vibe I got? Like walking into a room where someone's just been murdered, where there's blood spatter, something's happened, right? And so, Nat, given that that's the starting place, where do you feel like you are right now?
That's a better phrase question.
I am first to admit that I am wrong. I am not totally wrong here. I'm just kidding. I probably am. But there was a moment here in this episode that really impressed me, and it was something that Walt said that obviously I had not thought about. I watched this movie one time. I brought my first impression to this podcast, to this episode. I mean, after doing a little bit of reading and research on it, right? When, Walt, you mentioned the Iron Maiden as the death transformation from the life of Bruce Wayne to the death of Batman, right? To death being Batman. That is not a level that I approach this movie on. I would happily do so now.
Well, I hope that when you do, whether that's soon or 10 years from now,
It will be 10 years from now.
Well, 10 years from now, on this very day. No, 10 years from now, I do hope that you. I'm sorry. Christmas is the day that this is. Absolutely. I hope that that when you do, I hope you do enjoy it more. I mean, that's all I can say. Like, I have no vested interest in this. I mean, I have nothing to disclose. Just that this is a movie that I think on Letterboxd previously I'd given 3 stars. I think now I'd probably give it like 4.5. It really has risen in my estimation a lot, and I can't stress enough. In part, just by direct contrast to the original Batman movie, to '89 Batman, I should say, that you can tell they're both going for a lot of the same things, and the first one is just like a rough draft that Batman Returns just nails. Personally, I think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my memory of the movie was I probably would have given it something like 3 stars. I'd probably maybe bump it up to 3.5 ish. Maybe not 4, maybe not quite 4.5. But I think I do like Tim Burton movies, so I do like the vibe of the dark kind of. I'm also like a big fan of like horror movies. I don't know, maybe that's where I'm coming in as kind of I like that aesthetic, whereas kind of like the goofy, very cheesy aspect of it maybe not wouldn't do it for me. So I think in this,
Well,
well, but
two
it is
two
cheesy.
things. I mean, it is cheesy,
Yes.
but also one, that scene where Danny DeVito bites that guy's nose haunted me as a kid and haunts me still. It
It's great.
is truly unsettling.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. And that is the movie in a nutshell, and I think in a lot of ways. But also, when Selena gets like resurrected by the cats, I only noticed this time that how it happens is not just like cat magic or whatever, them licking her face, they're biting her hands. Like
Hmm.
you see like biting into the fingers, and it is really distressing. Like I would not want my kids that I don't have, my dogs, I guess, my imaginary children to. It is horrific. It's really like a horror undertone to this whole thing.
It is a very, it's like borderline horror-ish.
Yeah.
Like the ending especially. I mean, it's very close. Like if Tim Burton wanted to make this into an R movie, he could have gotten there and made this even more disturbing. You could
Hmm.
make that movie, but yeah, I think it's as an entry into the Batman universe, I think it's better than I remember, but definitely not, the top tier. So that's where I would say for myself. But yeah, any final thoughts, Walt or Nat, on the film?
I've spoke my piece.
I think I've spoken my. I'll just repeat myself, as sometimes happens.
Fair enough. But yeah, so Walt and Nat from your various podcasts. I know you both mentioned it before, but if you have anything coming out, or are you sharing that your next season with? I think you did already.
I did on the Superman one. Yeah, I'm doing
Yeah.
Death of Superman.
Excellent. I have a
Looking.
memory of that one. Very, very vivid
Comic
memory
I
of
don't
that.
loathe.
But yeah, so but everyone should go check out the Black Casebook. Walt's on if you want to learn about Batman and if you want to learn about Superman. We have the DC universe here represented in the left of the projector this week, and thank you both for coming on.
Well, before
Thanks
we
for
go,
Oh,
having
go
me.
ahead.
when we were on Evan, you and I were on a live like Turn Leftist episode. Brandon sang a lot of praises for Collective Action Comics, and I would like to pay that forward to the Black Casebook. It is a staggering podcast. It is one of the few podcasts that I actively enjoy and cannot wait for the next one to come out on because I'm fairly burnt out on podcasts these days. Um, and the Black Casebook is truly something special.
I would agree because as not a avid Batman or even comic book reader, I feel like both of yours give me like the approach of a comic book that actually makes it so I can understand it without having read it or even know what's happened, like know what happened, which I think is very useful because not everyone is going to be, have a comic book background or having read it. So that would be for both. I'd say that's a key piece for me. And also just the content is great, but as far as the entry level for someone like myself.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, both of y'all. Evan, thanks for having me on. Thanks for having Nat on. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you both for
Yeah,
talking
thanks, y'all.
about Batman Returns, and you can find this podcast and those podcasts on Spotify, Apple, anywhere on the internet that you may consume your podcasts, and we will catch you next time.